There is a pain that almost nobody admits after the age of 60. It doesn't show up on routine exams. It doesn't make enough noise to be brought to a medical appointment, because admitting it out loud would transform a silent fear into a reality that one isn't yet ready to face. It's the feeling of realizing that your mind no longer responds the way it used to, and imagining, in silence, that from here on, everything will only get worse. First comes a forgotten name, not the name of someone you met once years ago, the name of someone close, someone you live with, someone whose name you've spoken hundreds of times, and that suddenly vanishes at the exact moment you need it. You continue the conversation, you work around it, you're careful that nobody notices the hesitation, but you noticed. Then comes a word that disappears mid-sentence. You know what you want to say. The idea is completely formed in your mind, but the word, the exact word that would express the thought with precision, simply doesn't come. You substitute another vaguer, less precise, and internally you feel that pang of frustration that is becoming far too familiar. Then comes that strange feeling of walking into a room and not remembering why. You were doing something, you had a clear purpose, you took 3 steps and the purpose evaporated. You stand there, looking around, trying to reconstruct the mental path that brought you there. And then the real fear is born. Not the fear of the forgetting itself. That's uncomfortable, embarrassing, but bearable. The real fear is what these moments represent, what they point toward, where they seem to be heading. It's the fear of depending on your children for tasks that were always automatic, of needing someone to check whether the stove was turned off, whether the bill was paid, whether the medication was taken, of losing the autonomy built over decades of effort, of work, of conscious choices, of feeling that your own life is slipping through your hands, not all at once, not dramatically, but in small and growing doses that nobody can identify a clear starting point for. That fear is far more common than statistics can capture, because most people carry it completely alone. And while that fear grows in silence, a narrative installs itself. It's age. This is just how it goes. There's nothing to be done. That narrative is dangerous not because it's completely false. Aging does produce changes in the brain. That's undeniable. It's dangerous because it's partially false in a way that prevents people from taking the actions that could make a real difference. Because the truth that modern neuroscience has established with increasing clarity over the last 2 decades is that most of the cognitive decline people experience is not caused simply by the passage of time. It's caused by the environment that was created for the brain over time. And that distinction changes everything. Because environments can be changed, the brain suffers directly from low-grade chronic inflammation, that silent state of immune alert that inadequate diet, sedentary living, unmanaged stress, and sleep deprivation sustain over years. It suffers from reduced cerebral circulation, which diminishes the supply of oxygen and nutrients to neural tissue. It suffers from glycemic instability that creates waves of mental fog and cognitive exhaustion. It suffers from deficiencies in specific nutrients that directly participate in communication between neurons, sleep quality, and the capacity for nightly recovery. In many cases, the brain isn't giving out, it's asking for support. And there is an enormous difference between those 2 statements. Now, there is something about how the brain functions that most people are completely unaware of, and that is central to understanding why the right food at the right time can make a difference that goes far beyond what any cup of coffee could ever offer. The real recovery work of the brain doesn't happen in the morning. It happens at night. While you sleep, especially during the deep phases, the brain enters an operating mode completely different from what's active during the day. A mode that most people never notice because it's happening while they're unconscious. a mode that is possibly the most productive and most critical period for long-term cognitive health. The first process is glymphatic cleaning. The glymphatic system, a network of channels surrounding the brain's blood vessels, becomes active during deep sleep, circulating cerebrospinal fluid through brain tissue and removing metabolic waste accumulated throughout the day. Among that waste are proteins like amyloid beta, whose progressive accumulation is strongly associated with cognitive decline in the most recent research. Studies from the University of Rochester showed that this glymphatic flow during deep sleep can be up to 10 times greater than during waking hours. 10 times. What that means in practice is simple and sobering. Every night of poor sleep, every interrupted cycle, every deep phase that doesn't happen as it should, is a night when the brain didn't complete its cleaning, when the previous day's residues remained accumulated, when the silent damage of the day wasn't adequately repaired. The second process is memory consolidation. During sleep, especially during REM sleep, the brain processes and organizes the information received throughout the day. It decides what to consolidate into long-term memory and what to discard. It strengthens the synaptic connections associated with important learning. It integrates new information with existing knowledge in ways that are only possible during this state of internal processing. When sleep is superficial, fragmented, or insufficient in the right phases, this consolidation doesn't happen completely, and the memory that seems to be getting worse isn't being adequately formed, isn't being adequately consolidated, and therefore isn't available when you need it. The third process is hormonal regulation. During deep sleep, the body regulates a series of hormones critical to cognitive function. Growth hormone, which plays an important role in the recovery and repair of neural tissue, is secreted predominantly during deep sleep. The regulation of cortisol, whose chronically elevated levels are directly toxic to the hippocampus, happens largely during sleep. And melatonin, beyond regulating sleep cycles, exerts direct antioxidant effects on brain tissue. When these nightly processes work well, the result is waking up with a clear mind, with sharper reasoning, with more accessible memory, with the cognitive energy that allows the day to begin in a genuinely functional way. When these processes are systematically compromised by poor sleep quality, by deficiency in the nutrients that support them, by stress that prevents entry into the deep phases, the result is that cycle of caffeine dependence that so many people know well. You wake up tired, you drink coffee to function, the coffee elevates cortisol, the cortisol fragments the next night's sleep, and the cycle perpetuates while the brain accumulates, night after night, a recovery deficit that progressively manifests as cognitive decline. It was exactly from the understanding of these nightly processes that researchers identified something surprising. There is a simple, accessible, and widely ignored food that, consumed at the right moment, directly supports these nightly recovery mechanisms. You'll find it at the first link in the description. While millions of people depend on coffee to function during the day, researchers in brain nutrition have been observing with growing interest a food that for a long time went completely unnoticed in discussions about cognitive health. It isn't an exotic superfood imported from some remote corner of the planet. It doesn't cost a fortune. It doesn't require elaborate preparation or specialized knowledge to incorporate into a routine. It's pumpkin seeds, a small seed, inexpensive, available in any grocery store, that most people either discard or use only as an occasional topping, with no idea what they're leaving on the table. And the reason it deserves specific attention, especially consumed at night, approximately 1 hour before sleep, is directly related to the nightly brain recovery processes I just described. The first critical compound is Magnesium. Pumpkin seeds are one of the most concentrated dietary sources of magnesium available. A 10-gram serving, the amount suggested in this protocol, provides a real and significant contribution to daily levels of this mineral, and magnesium matters for sleep and for the brain in very specific ways. It regulates the activity of the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest state that needs to predominate for deep sleep to happen. When magnesium levels are adequate, the transition to sleep is easier. The deep phases are more complete, and waking is less fragmented. It regulates NMDA receptors, fundamental structures for synaptic plasticity and memory consolidation. Studies show that adequate magnesium levels are associated with greater synaptic density in the hippocampus, and it participates in the synthesis of GAB, the main inhibitory neurotransmitter of the central nervous system, responsible for creating the state of neural calm necessary for entry into the deep phases of sleep. A significant percentage of the adult population over 60 has inadequate magnesium levels, and many will never know, because magnesium deficiency rarely produces obvious symptoms. It manifests subtly: poor quality sleep, irritability, cramping, difficulty relaxing, and critically compromised cognitive function. The second compound is tryptophan. Pumpkin seeds are one of the foods with the highest concentration of tryptophan per gram, the amino acid precursor to serotonin and melatonin. Here is the mechanism that makes this fact relevant for brain health. The tryptophan you ingest at night, especially when consumed in a small amount, without competition from other amino acids in a full meal, crosses the blood-brain barrier more easily and is converted to serotonin in the brain. Serotonin, in turn, is the direct precursor to melatonin, the hormone that regulates sleep cycles. But serotonin also has direct effects on mood, emotional regulation, and the capacity to maintain a stable mental state throughout the day. The third compound is zinc. Zinc is a mineral frequently neglected in discussions about brain health, but with functions that go far beyond the immune system. Most people associate it with in the context of the brain. Zinc participates in the synthesis and regulation of multiple neurotransmitters. It modulates NMDA receptor activity, placing it, alongside magnesium, as a regulator of synaptic plasticity and memory formation processes. It has antioxidant roles in neural tissues, and studies show that zinc deficiency is associated with cognitive impairment, especially in older adults where absorption of this mineral tends to be less efficient. Pumpkin seeds are one of the most bioavailable dietary sources of zinc available. The fourth compound is healthy fats, especially unsaturated fatty acids. The brain is composed of approximately 60% fat. The membranes of neural cells are formed largely by unsaturated fatty acids, and the fluidity of those membranes, which directly influences synaptic transmission efficiency, depends on the continuous availability of these fatty acids in the diet. Pumpkin seeds are rich in monosaturated and polyunsaturated fatty acids that contribute to this structural maintenance of neural membranes. And the fifth element is antioxidants, especially vitamin E and the carotenoids present in the seeds. The brain, due to its extremely high oxygen consumption, is particularly vulnerable to oxidative damage, and neurons, unlike most other cells in the body, have limited regenerative capacity, which makes antioxidant protection especially critical in the context of brain aging. Not magic. Applied physiology at the right moment of the day, the nighttime period, when the brain is actively recovering and when these compounds are most directly utilized by the restoration processes. If you want to start this process today, what researchers have isolated about this nighttime protocol and how to implement it practically is available at the first link in the description, as simple as it always should have been. But there is an even deeper part of this story that needs to be told. When memory begins failing frequently, something happens that goes far beyond cognitive inconvenience. A silent emotional shift occurs that is rarely discussed, but that people who live through it recognize immediately when someone finally names it clearly. You start hiding, not literally, not obviously, but in subtle ways that accumulate. You start speaking less in groups, because having to ask someone to repeat themselves or losing the thread of what you were saying is too embarrassing. You start avoiding certain conversations, the ones that require you to access specific information, remember dates, mention names. You start doubting yourself before opening your mouth. Did I already say this? Am I repeating myself? And that doubt, repeated day after day, erodes. Something that is hard to name but that everyone feels when they lose it, confidence in their own mind. At the same time, family dynamics start changing in ways nobody planned and that often nobody can clearly articulate. The children, driven by genuine love, but also by anxiety, begin taking over functions you always managed alone. Begin helping in ways that, however well-intentioned, send a clear message. We no longer fully trust you. Conversations that were once between equals acquire a new asymmetry. Decisions that used to be yours start being discussed, which often means someone is reviewing your choices before implementing them. And underneath all of this, underneath the arguments about consultations and tests, underneath the checking phone calls, underneath the exchanged glances you pretend not to notice, there is a simple and painful truth. Everyone is afraid. You're afraid of getting worse. They're afraid of losing who you are. And that fear, when unnamed, when it finds no constructive path, becomes conflict, becomes tension, becomes that silent distance. Nobody knows exactly when it started. The good news, and there is real good news here, not empty consolation, but concrete evidence, is that the brain is not a passive system in the face of these circumstances. It is adaptable. At any age, neuroplasticity, this concept revolutionized neuroscience in recent decades and still hasn't reached clearly enough the conversations people have about aging. The idea that the adult brain is fixed, that after a certain age neural connections can only decrease, never increase, has been completely overturned by the evidence. We know today that the adult brain can create new synapses, can reorganize neural roots to work around compromised areas, can, in response to adequate stimulation, grow in regions that were in decline. The hippocampus, the most critical region for forming new memories, and the first to be affected in cognitive decline, has demonstrated in neuroimaging studies the capacity to increase in volume in response to regular aerobic exercise, cognitive stimulation, and adequate nutritional support. This isn't motivational theory, it's documented biology, and it means that the actions you take today, the habits you begin building now, have real capacity to influence the trajectory of your brain. Not magically, not instantly, but really and progressively. The restorative sleep that pumpkin seeds help create is one of those. Actions: regular physical movement, 30-minute walks that improve cerebral circulation and stimulate BDNF production is another. Active cognitive stimulation, anti-inflammatory nutrition, stress management, reduction of dependence on stimulants that compromise sleep quality. Each of these actions is a signal sent to the brain that conditions are changing, and when conditions change consistently, the system responds, not overnight, but in ways that begin appearing in details that people describe in remarkably similar terms when they start implementing these adjustments. Waking up with a clearer mind, that morning fog that had become the norm beginning to lift, the sluggishness of the first hours of the day becoming less intense, the memory for names, for details, for where things were placed, becoming more reliable. the confidence to participate in conversations without the background anxiety that something will fail at the wrong moment, gradually returning, not instant. Transformation, progressive reconstruction, and progressive is more powerful because it's real. Let me be specific about how to incorporate this protocol in practice. The recommendation is simple: approximately 10 grams of pumpkin seeds, roughly 1 full tablespoon, consumed about 1 hour before sleep. They can be chewed directly, lightly ground. Added to a small glass of warm milk, a spoonful of honey, a piece of light fruit. What matters is the timing, that window of approximately 6 minutes before sleep, when the ingested tryptophan has time to be converted to serotonin and initiate the chain that culminates in melatonin production. The amount matters. This isn't a case of more is better. 10 grams is sufficient to provide the relevant compounds without overloading digestion with excess fats and proteins at a moment. When the body is preparing to slow down, consistency matters more than perfection. 1 week of regular use produces more perceptible results than 1 month of irregular use. The brain responds to patterns, and a consistent nightly pattern of nutritional support is exactly the type of signal that nervous system learns to recognize and optimize around. Context matters. The nighttime pumpkin seed works better when inserted into a sleep environment that has been thoughtfully arranged. Appropriate room temperature, absence of blue light in the preceding hours, consistent sleep and wake times, absence of heavy meals in the 2 hours before sleep, not complicated, just alignment of conditions. The complete method is in the pinned comment. And if this content made sense to you, subscribe to the channel. In the upcoming videos, I'll keep showing you what science has to teach about recovering memory, protecting mental clarity, and aging with more autonomy, dignity, and freedom. Aging doesn't have to mean gradually disappearing, doesn't have to be a slow loss of identity, doesn't have to be synonymous with growing confusion and progressive dependence, doesn't have to culminate in that silent fear that so many people carry without being able to put into words. The brain can keep responding, can keep recovering, can keep being a reliable ally in conversations, in decisions, in the moments that define who you are, as long as it receives the conditions it needs, as long as sleep is treated as the health priority that it is, as long as the right nutrients are available at the right time. The answer may not be in 1 more cup of coffee in the morning. It may be in something small, simple, consistent, used the right way, at the right moment, with an understanding of why it works.